Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I am very excited because I've got my That's Comical colleague, Cammie, here. And Cammie, you know how much I love to record videos with you.
Yes, likewise. And these are my favorite because this is really how you and I started our comic book journey. So I'm excited to get started. So let's talk some movies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a DC animated live show. It has been a year since we've done this because we just have to wait for all the releases to come. And it was so funny how we're literally almost at the close of 2023 because we were originally supposed to do this back in the end of the summer, I believe. And the funniest thing was, on the morning of the day that we were going to record our video, I said to Cammie, we have to put this on pause and wait because apparently there's one more movie coming out. And if I did not know that the trailer was actually all over YouTube, I never would have known. And we would have just been walking around for the rest of the year with egg on our face. So I'm very glad that I actually managed to just find that trailer on a whim. And here we are discussing the complete DC animated universe and animated original movie 2023 package. So I guess the question that I want to ask you, Cammie, which road do we want to go down first? Do we want to discuss the DC animated Tomorrowverse, or do we want to just talk about the original films that are just the plain old standalones first? Where would you like to go first?
I think the standalones, and then we'll kind of segue into the others.
Okay, okay. So we're going to start with a film that I am extremely surprised has gotten so much hate from so many people. And I cannot understand why, because I personally think out of all of the DC animated films that I saw this year, Batman, The Doom That Came to Gotham, for me, without a doubt, is the best DC animated movie of 2023, in my opinion, because this movie went in directions that I never anticipated Batman to go. And I mean, it would have been great for us to actually do this around Halloween time because you couldn't get more horror than Batman the Doom That Came to Gotham. I didn't even know that it was even originally a graphic novel. So I never even read the original source material. But this was the movie that I was very much excited to talk to you about just because you are the That's Comical Scream Queen. And let me just tell you guys, 2024 is going to be Cammie's breakout year because she's going to be doing a lot of work with me and Andy and the rest of the team, but she's also doing some solo projects because she's finally going to have the internet capabilities that she has been so desiring for such a long time. And I'm looking forward to what you have in store, Cammie, but let's not go into that direction. Let's talk about Batman, the Doom That Came to Gotham.
You know, Batman is my guy. He always has been. He's really my gateway to comic books in general. But I love the dark side of DC, and the Doom That Came to Gotham is just that. But I think where it kind of falls short for a lot of people is when it gets really gritty like that. And Elseworlds, you know, they're hard because it's either you're going to love the direction that it's headed or you're going to hate the direction that it heads. And I think this was one of the more brilliant ones. I loved this movie. I thought it was very well executed. I loved how the animation style was so closely adapted from the graphic novel. It was gritty and it did the series justice. For me, it also touched on some of my favorite villains. I love Cobblepot, and he was here. I love Two-Face. He is always a win for me. And Ra's al Ghul, he's right up there for me in my favorite villains. He just, every time he encapsulates the screen, no matter how small his part is, and usually he does have a pretty small part, you know, he's just kind of that driving force for a plot, but he doesn't have a lot of dialogue. He just tends to do it for me. So I don't know why people are being so harsh with this film, because this film is it it has a lot of dimensions to it, and I think for me, it resonated on a lot of those levels. It really hit the mark for me in a lot of spots.
Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail, every single nail on the head with the biggest hammer you could ever find. Because one of the few things that I appreciated that this movie did was it was a little bit of a reminder of the glory days of the DC animated direct to DVD film library way back when it started with Superman Doomsday. Because I mean, I don't know about you, Cammy, but especially when it comes to the animated universe films here and not the original movies, I personally feel that DC has been slipping. I don't think they've slipped as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe has gone with phases 4 and 5, but I just remember those films being so much better. And Batman the Doom that came to Gotham, taking the animation and adapting it to the style of the graphic novel was what Bruce Timm originally sought out to do with this direct to home video release series. They wanted to go to the basis, to the source material. I mean, take a look at some of those earlier films. Look at Justice League The New Frontier. Look at Batman, Superman, Public Enemies. You know, those were movies that wanted to pay tribute to the artwork as well as the stories themselves. And Batman the Doom that came to Gotham does that in so many great ways. And I appreciate when it comes to these alternative, possible Elseworld stories, how are you going to incorporate the rest of Batman's world into these stories? So I love the fact that it's a Depression era story. I really like how they incorporated the villains and not necessarily as villains and not necessarily even as antagonists. I loved how they turned Penguin into a scientist that's lost his mind, and the fact that they turned Poison Ivy into a plant demon. They just did so many interesting things to so much of Batman's world in great ways. They did the same thing in Batman Gotham by Gaslight, which is also a movie that we never really talked about yet. I think we should be doing that next year when we celebrate the 75th, the 85th anniversary of Batman. But I also loved what they did with the Bat family. I kind of loved the fact that the Jason Todd character was actually like an Irish Indian. And I like the fact that he had a little bit of a different spelling in his name. Like it was Sanjay Todd, Tawd. I loved that. And I also loved Kylie Kane, who was a take on Cassandra Kane. I can't remember what her alias is. I think it's the Orphan, I believe so, possibly even a new version of Batgirl. But I just loved what they did, and even incorporated characters like Jason Blood, aka Etrigan the Demon, and Oliver Queen, aka Green Arrow, and how everything tied together in a beautiful package. I think the reason why people don't like it is they say it's such a slow burn, but I love the drama. I love the atmosphere. I mean, that's to me what always makes a great film. If it's very atmospheric and it captures what you're supposed to feel while you're reading a book or watching a movie, if it doesn't capture that atmosphere, it's not going to grab me per se. But Batman the Doom that came to Gotham did it all for me.
And I think that's another problem with this newer generation. I mean, I don't know who's making all the negative commentary. Maybe it's some of those that have a rich history with comics. But that said, I think that the appreciation for films like this really has to come with that take back. You can't expect the action all the time. It doesn't have to be go, go, go. You don't always have to fly out of the seat of your pants and be from point A to point Z in an hour. Sometimes that slow burn, especially with these darker ambiance kind of core film. I mean, I really felt like we went to the depths of hell with this movie. And I mean, as a horror aficionado, that's really saying something for what this film encapsulated for me, because I love the fact that it was not only gritty in terms of the animation and the color palette and the characters that they chose to carry the story through, but just the overall dialogue of this tale really makes you feel like, you know, Batman is sacrificing himself for the city that he loves, and he's willing to watch it burn to the ground. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you know what? I think that's really, in essence, what Gotham needed. Gotham needed really just a fresh do-over. You know, it needed to be the phoenix that rose from the ashes. And so the way it was all executed and neatly put in a package and tied with a bow, it was just done so well. So I don't know how people can be so critical of it. I think you just need to take a step back and watch it again and appreciate it for all the things that it does do very well.
Because the thing about Batman is the one thing that I personally appreciate about Batman, and it's not necessarily something that you see whenever Batman is in a comic or on a television show, it's the gothic atmosphere. The gothic is something that if you bring it to the Batman world, I know for a solid fact that I'm going to love it. And if you're going to have Batman in the Depression era, you've got, if there's anything that goes perfect in there, it's Lovecraftian work, and that's basically what this story is. It's Batman in the Lovecraftian ways of horror. And considering the fact that we just recently had such a praiseworthy show like Lovecraft Country, it's, you've also read the books. The books do follow this exact same atmosphere, storyline, like the Lovecraftian atmosphere and the demons from other dimensions, they're in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the importance of it is the gothic underlying theme has always run in Gotham City. How people don't see that, I mean, just by the sheer construction of the architecture of the buildings. I mean, really, if you look at Gotham City, it is always dark, it is always gritty, it is always wet, it's dripping with some kind of villain. You know, it is just, it screams gothic. And so for me, when I get the feeling of gothic plus the visualization of that, and it just mirrors together and pairs so well, you really have a very quintessential classic tale. So I do hope people that have been very critical of this film do look at it through a new lens, because you'll see that here tonight, because you and I have had a conversation about another film we're going to talk about later in the program, that I watched it for a second time and I have a new feeling on it. So I think sometimes it takes that, you know, as a fan of any comic legacy, whether that be DC or if you're more of a Marvel person, and you find yourself kind of at a battle of wits with something, just take a step back and don't necessarily watch it through a critical lens. Just watch it through a you know, appreciation of film, or you know, maybe a color palette, maybe it's a producer, a director vantage point that you're watching it from, and don't look at it as I have to be critical of this or I have to find all the things that are wrong with it. Because sometimes when you go in with preconceived notions on something, you end up missing really beautiful things about storylines and characters and how they pair them together and just how the story flows. And even if it's a slow burn, that's okay too. That's something to be greatly appreciated. And I think something that we don't appreciate enough in our go kind of society attitude.
Yeah, and a couple of the other things. I mean, I think the color palette was beautiful. The animation, especially when they showed us the grotesque. I mean, that's one of the few things that I was so impressed by. And I was even more impressed with the fact that this movie was a PG-13 rated film, and yet the grotesque atmosphere and the images of some of these creatures were just so creepy and haunting, and it just drove that film for me. It was so beautiful. It really was, to me, a true work of art, and it's something that I feel that the DC libraries have been sorely missing for quite some time.
PG rating was fair. There wasn't a lot of cursing in this. I mean, there was the share fair of violence, but I don't think it was so over the top that, you know, would have been harming for children to watch this. But I also think that in terms of the rating, you don't get a lot of like when I I think of rated R kind of DC, I'm thinking like super bloody and you don't get that, and you don't get that with Lovecraftian period. Lovecraftian horror is very atmospheric. It leaves you with all of this description and all of these visualizations that allow your mind to kind of lead you to the place of scare or the place of horror that is your definition of that. And I think that's the beauty of Lovecraft horror, is that you don't get to see this is how it looks and this is how it feels. You as the reader get to feel it, and you get to say, oh, this is how my mind envisions it, this is how my body feels it as I'm reading it. I can remember back to the first Lovecraft I read, and the description of the sound that the monster was making is what really stuck out with me. So for this, when I'm thinking back, I'm thinking of just the pure beauty of the tentacles that you see, and but there's also a big historical feel that I got from this movie, and I think that's also another reason that maybe the PG was tagged onto this, because kids can kind of relate to that night aspect of it, or that that chivalrous kind of respect when they were kind of going through the sins of the father
Yeah,
storyline.
I,
So
lo- I
I thought that was
love
pretty cool.
I love that part when they gave me the backstory. That was the part that really like what made it all get woven together, and it was just so crazy to see that it was actually Oliver's father that killed Batman's parents. I also loved the small change that they made to his origin story, that it actually happened on the grounds of Wayne Manor. That was crazy interesting. But there were
Yeah,
also
I love that aspect.
the things on the movie that just made it so familiar. Like I think that the part that really reminds me like I'm watching Batman is when you just see the dynamic relationship between Batman and Alfred. That's just the classic, because I'm just saying, like, when I bought this movie, I had no idea what I was getting into. Most of the DC movies, all of the DC movies for me, if I don't know the source material, it's a blind buy regardless, because it's DC animation and I crave it. And I really did not know what I was getting into. But when I watched the first few minutes when Batman and his team were in the Antarctic, and you listen to how Oswald Cobblepot is writing in his diary, and when they meet Grendon for the first time, and the way that Grendon speaks, I'm like, okay, I'm in for something interesting here. This is gonna be a fun ride. Just that was like when I said, oh boy, we're bringing the horror, we're bringing the creep factor in. This is gonna be one absolute mind fuck. I'm excited.
Yeah,
That's
all
what
very
it is.
valid points. There was definitely a creep factor there. The choice again of characters, and I appreciate that about Bruce Timm, because Bruce Timm really looked to the animators for a lot of his, single plot films, and asked them, what is your vision here? What characters do you want to see? And I think that's really important to ask your animators questions like that, because then we do get to experience characters that we maybe haven't seen in a while, or characters that we don't feel get a lot of limelight. So it's really incredible to see some of these characters come to life. And I'm so glad you mentioned Alfred, because that was the one that really tugged at my heartstrings when Batman is leaving, walking down the stairs, and he says goodbye to him. And there's a realization there that we're not going to see Batman the way we remember him in that moment. Like, he really does say goodbye, and we
Yeah,
watch
that
him
was
walk
that was a big
inevitably to his
surprise.
death.
That was
It
probably
was
the
it was
biggest surprise for
heartwarming and
me.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's a fantastic film. It's top notch. It's beautifully executed. It's a 4 out of 4 stars for me, hands down. I watching it a third time because I bought it. I watched it first time, and then when we were going to talk about it, I was going to review it, and I watched it the second time, and then I had to watch it again because they had to push the whole show off. But I'm glad, because it was really great to watch a third time. It really, it's one of those few movies that I did not anticipate it having the rewatchability that it does. It really does, because this is also a real thinking man's Batman movie, and those are the best kinds of Batman movies. It's one that you're going to want to watch over and over again because of the story because of the images, you might have missed something in your initial watch, and you're going to be very surprised if you spot something brand new. And that's what I think I think that's what makes this movie so special to me.
Absolutely. And I really like the rewatchability films because when you do rewatch them, you not only could you possibly catch something you may have missed, but it allows you then to shift your focus to a different character. Because, like, for me, I go off the initial title. So if it's a Batman title, obviously I'm going to be very honed in on Batman and, what's going on with his storyline, where is this taking us? But the second time I watch it, maybe I want to focus a little bit more on someone else's storyline and see kind of who is that character and why were they brought into this story and what do I need to know about them. So I think that's really important for the rewatchability factor is, if you are one of those, once again, negative people out there that didn't really enjoy this the first time around, watch it for a second time through a different lens and maybe put your focus on a different character or a different storyline and see if it drives your opinion to a different direction. Oh,
Right.
and 4 out of 4 for me as well.
So let's take a look at the next films, because it's not going to be just one, because this is one of those occasions where we get a two-part film series, and we're going to now take a complete 180, and we're going to go from the darkness to the lighthearted and fun-spirited. And we're going to be talking about Justice League RWBY, Superheroes and Huntsmen, parts 1 and 2. Now, a little bit of a background thing for me personally, and I actually did say this on the 2 reviews that I did over on my other channel. RWBY is something that if you're not familiar with, you're probably not going to get a large chunk of this movie, and you're probably not going to like it. If you are a fan of the Rooster Teeth RWBY show, which is going into its 10th season at this point in time, it's crazy to believe, though I personally feel that it should have ended 4 years ago, but that's just me, because they're really stretching the story. But I remember when the world of RWBY first came out, and it looked like Harry Potter meets anime meets Grimm fairy tales. I saw the trailers and I'm like, I'm all in on this, and I was hooked from day one. The Justice League RWBY crossover is actually something that has happened in the comic books. Not necessarily with this story, but there have been RWBY comics, and there have been some RWBY / Justice League crossovers. So when I heard that there was going to be some animated movies, and more importantly, using the Rooster Teeth RWBY animation style, I was excited to see the girls, but I was more excited to see how the Justice League was going to get animated in these movies. And more importantly, I was so thrilled that DC Animation got the original voice cast of RWBY, because you can use different voices for DC characters, but if you're going to bring RWBY into these worlds, you have to get that original cast, and you've got to let them do this job. So the fact that these 4 women were able to showcase their characters to probably an entirely new audience without even knowing it, that's a great feat. So I'm curious about your thought, Cammie, because I know you have never stepped into the world of RWBY before until you saw these movies.
No, so this was actually the one that I referenced just a few minutes ago that we had talked about before offline, and I didn't like it. The first time I saw it, I just did not connect with the story at all. I didn't connect with the characters. I didn't honestly know what was happening. And I don't know if that was because I immediately felt disconnected because I didn't recognize these characters. When I go into an animation, I want at least a little bit of backstory. I want to know what I'm getting myself into. And I think it's a little bit less complicated when you step into the world of DC and you're introduced to characters that have literally been around for decades, that many people are familiar with. But if you're like me and you're fairly new to the comic world, you can be introduced to a character or two and not know everything about them or have read every, series or a story arc that they've been in and follow along. But when you mirror DC animation and anime, that's a whole other beast. And so being not familiar with anime as a lot of people are today, because anime is extremely popular, and I don't read a lot of mangas. I've read a few in my life, and again, I'm not a big fan because I don't like the whole reading backwards, bottom up kind of thing. I get confused, and then I end up having to read pages over again. But I watched it again. And when I watched it again, I did what I told people to do with, the previous film that we just discussed. And I watched it from a different lens, and I wasn't as critical. And I just went in with a clear slate. I said, you know what? I might not know Ruby and her friends. I might not understand the world in which she lives, but I'm going to go into this just watching it as a film goer. And Steve, I loved it. I really did.
I mean,
really grew to love Ruby. Her personality is just amazing. She's just a delight. I really loved her interaction with Clark. I love the little jokes that they made about him, like Superman. No, I don't think so. We'll just call you Clark. Just little things like that that I completely dismissed the first time around because I was being a snob. And her friends are truly friends. I mean, they really have each other's back. When you start to kind of listen to where they came from and what their worlds are about, it was kind of heartbreaking because these are teenagers, and to hear how much they've sacrificed of themselves and that some of their families are no longer with them, and just the trials and tribulations that led them to that moment, you really grow a sheer admiration for them and their bravery and what got them to that point. So, in that essence, as a DC fan, you're like, wow, you really hold the honor to be able to stand next to the Justice League, because I feel that they have fought just as hard of battles in their own worlds. So yeah, I really grew to love this, and I do hope to be introduced to Ruby's world on her terms and her turf.
yeah, it's very easy to access the world of RWBY. That's one of the few things that I can definitely say. I also am not surprised that after the second watch, you gave it another try and you started to realize that it's definitely something you can enjoy, because you are a big fan of the 2003 Teen Titans show, which has a lot of anime undertones. But I also had a feeling that you were going to like it, because here was the one thing that I was very excited about and very curious how it was going to happen. RWBY's world, the RWBY show, when it comes to action, is very exciting. It's in your face. It's a mile a minute. And you also got to admit, damn, those weapons are amazing. Those weapons are the coolest things in the world. RWBY's scythe that can turn into a gun. When I first saw that in the original RWBY trailer, I was like, oh my God, that is, I'm going to throw out an old school slang word. That is bitchin'. Like, that was something so cool to see. But you're right. It is lighthearted. It is fun. There is drama to it as well. There's a great story in the world of RWBY, which is why I was so happy that I knew a lot of that side of the coin when I was going into it, because there were a lot of flashbacks on both sides of the first movie. I mean, let's at least talk about what happened. So in the first movie, the Justice League shows up in Remnant, which is the world that RWBY lives in, and her sister Yang and their friends Blake and Weiss, they are part of a school called Beacon, where they're being trained to be huntsmen, to fight these weird creatures called the Grimm and protect their world. Similarly to the fact that the Justice League protects their cities, protects their worlds, saves the innocent people. I was just taken aback by the fact that they were really referencing older seasons of the show. Like, Beacon goes all the way back to season 1. So, and the way that they looked, what they were wearing, that went all the way back to season 1, because we then found out at the very end that the whole thing was a whole dream sequence. And then when they woke up, all the RWBY people looked very different, because that's what they look like on the show right now. So they've been aging them up, which I think is great. But RWBY is fun. It is laugh out loud fun. It's dramatic. It's exciting. It's action packed. You also got to meet other characters. You got to meet the remaining Team Juniper, which was John, Nora, and Ren. And Nora is my favorite character. You watch RWBY, you're gonna love Nora. I promise you, she is the best. But the fact that the Justice League meets them in this simulation and they are turned into teenagers. I loved the concepts of their looks and their uniforms. Like, I also loved the fact that they actually turned two of the Justice League members into faunus, which is the humans and remnant with animal characteristics, like Blake, who is cat-like. So the fact that they gave Vixen a foxtail, the fact that they gave Batman wings. My favorite part of the movie is when he realizes he has wings and he says, "How the heck does Superman do this?" Like, that was so funny. But that's what RWBY does. RWBY brings great comedic timing to some of the most dramatic moments.
Yeah, and not only that, but it had such a video game feel. And as a video game person, I love that aspect. And I think that really helped me fall into the world of Remnant because it gave me a different take on the Grimm. It really made me interested in their backstory, like what is at the heart of their purpose, like why are they after these teenagers, like it had me the whole time asking questions to project me through. I wanted to know the why. I wanted to know these characters more intimately. I wanted to really just fall into that space. But then I also wanted a controller in my hand and I wanted to be part of this world. And I think that's a really cool thing when you can have someone watch a movie and really just kind of fall into that and feel like they're part of the story. So I think it was very well done on the level of animation. The fact that you're saying that they paired that with the actual show and they show the age progression and the flashbacks is super cool. These are all things, of course, that I would not be privy to, not having watched the show. But going in, I would definitely watch this again. And I would love to, again, visit that world of RWBY so that I had some of that knowledge. And I think that would give me a greater appreciation for this film.
You can watch old episodes of RWBY, I believe, on roosterteeth.com for free. I believe you can. Other than that, I think they're also even on DVD for like $7 a disc. I don't know. I never bought them, but I've watched them many, many times. I also really appreciated how they actually showed that even though the Justice League is seasoned superheroes, and when they're in this other world, how there's still a lot that they can learn. And you see that a great deal through Jessica Cruz, aka Green Lantern's story arc. I really appreciated what they did with her, and I love how she developed this amazing relationship with Jean, because in the show of RWBY, Jean, he starts out as the wannabe hero, but he's such a klutz. He doesn't think everything clearly. Like, he's the comedic relief mostly in the very, very beginning. And I also am certain that you noticed a specific character when he and Jessica teamed up, a girl that he seemed to have a connection with who goes by the name of Pyrrha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what happened to her. You have to watch the show because that's
okay.
I'm just going to say that was where, because of her story arc, that was when the show went from extremely fun and lighthearted to, wait a minute, there's actually a little bit of darkness and drama to this world as well. So it only advanced the story forward. But I just loved how they all built relationships with each other. Like, I loved how, yes, in the show, Yang and Blake, there is a love interest there. And I loved how Yang started making goo-goo eyes at Wonder Woman. That was really funny. I loved the relationship between RWBY and Superman. That was wonderful. I mean, I think that's one of the main reasons why, I mean, let me just also say, the movie's not perfect. There's flaws. There are. But again, as a Justice League fan and a RWBY fan, because they really tried to tap into the things that make both of these worlds and these characters great, I think that's one of the main reasons why I enjoyed it as much as I did. Like I said, even though it's not perfect.
Well, and I think that's really hard to do when you have as many characters on the screen as we saw in this film, because you want character development, you want to see these stories advance, you also want to see character connectivity, and you want to see that chemistry between the characters. And that was all very well executed in a short amount of time. You know, we did get 2 parts to this film, which I think was very brilliant to kind of break it up, because it also gave you an anticipation of what lies ahead. But I think that we had the characters flushed out enough that we got enough of each character that we either wanted more, or in the case of like the Justice League for us, you know, we got to see a different side of them. We got to see them in a younger version, in a different world, out kind of outside of their comfort zone, and it was a lot of fun, you know. So there was a great amount of interest that I had in each one of these characters. Usually when I watch a film of this caliber and you have so much interaction like this, there's always like 1 or 2 characters that I don't really care for. I can't say that in this instance, and I'm so glad you mentioned Jessica Cruz, because her storyline was actually one of my absolute favorites. Just to
Yeah.
watch her development, to watch her sincerity, and I think a lot of people really resonate if they give her character time on, you know, either on the page or on the screen, because they can resonate with her in terms of just real life anxiety, you know, just the
Yeah.
trouble that we face as human beings, you know, of the challenges that we have to partake, and just how she finds that inner strength despite her setback, you know. And I mean, she does really have a debilitating anxiety, but yet she's a superhero, and that's so cool, you know.
Yeah,
So she's one
I
of my
mean,
favorite.
that's the reason why Jessica Cruz is still a relatively new character. She came into the world of DC Comics in the late 2000s, early 2010s. So she was introduced by Jeff Johns and later developed under the work of Robert Venditti. And again, it was a very interesting character because this is a girl with really bad anxiety issues, with some really bad mental health issues due to things that happened in her past. And the question that she always asks is, why did the ring choose me? I barely have the will to walk out of my house every single day. How do I have the ability to become a Green Lantern? Like, how could I possibly live up to the legacy of Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner and John Stewart and Kyle Rayner? Like, how can I do this? And I love how, not just in this movie, but in an older movie, Justice League versus the Fatal Five, where they really worked on Jessica Cruz's character. I just love how the DC animation studio works with her on so many levels because look, mental health is a very important talking point in our society today. So the fact that we have a superhero that so many people can relate to, and that so many people who have worked on this character in comic books and in these animated films are able to create amazing challenges for her. It's amazing what they're doing with this character, and I personally would like more of that.
Oh, 100%. I would love to see more films from her. I would love to see more storylines. The Fatal Five is actually where my first introduction to that character was at, and I absolutely love that film as well. I loved her character development there. But what I think she does for the new generation of comic readers is she gives people hope, you know, that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have this epic superpower. You can have a crippling setback that you deal with on your own merit, that your personal demons that you're dealing with, but you can still save the world and help your friends do so in the process, you know. And I think that's really cool because it kind of paves way for this idealistic world of perfection that I think we've built for not only ourselves, but just kind of, you know, how we take on the world, that everything has to have a place and everything has to make sense, and you have to do things by a certain age and you have to hit certain marks and check certain boxes. And by seeing characters like this who have flaws but still overcome them, but overcome them vocally, you know, you can see all of this happening, but you can also get the inner dialogue of the character, and you're kind of walking through that process with them. And in a way, it humanizes the character, but it also empowers the watcher, because for a minute you're like, oh cool, I could be a superhero too, you know?
Yeah, so we found out at the end of the first part that the person that had trapped them in this world was a villain named Kilgore, who is a villain I do know, but not that well. And once again, part of the Flash's rogue gallery. And he somehow managed to screw up his own simulation and end up being trapped inside the Flash. And I will, by the way, I will say, when it comes to DC characters in the role of Remnant, the Flash had the best look ever. And we then found out, when everybody found their way out, stopped Kilgore, and then went back into their separate worlds, we then go into part two, and the Grimm just happened to be running around Earth. And the DC characters have no idea why. We managed to see another character from the DC world. Black Canary joins the group in the second part, and they know that these are Grimm, and they've got to get the RWBY team back. And they only managed to bring Team RWBY in. Unfortunately, the other characters, I mean, I think that's another reason why these two movies work so well, because you have a little bit of one world when they're in that world, and then when they go into the other world, you get a little bit of that world and a little bit less of the other. So I think it was a nice balance. I mean, would it have been cool to see some of the other Justice League cast members? I felt that they were lacking just a little bit. I felt that if they had maybe Aquaman or maybe Shazam, it just would have been a little bit more perfect for me. But you can't get everything that you want. And I loved the fact that when Team RWBY is on Earth, they actually had to embody superhero looks, which was pretty fun to me. And I will probably say my favorite part of part two is the subtle things that they do with the DC villains. I love the fact that because they feel that they're helpless, they have to join the Justice League. Except for that one little scene where Harley and the Joker are in beach chairs on a rooftop, watching everything go crazy and having the greatest time of their lives. But my favorite scene is when the Weather Wizard and Mirror Master encounter everybody, and Yang goes, "Weather Wizard? What's the other guy's name? Sunshine Sorcerer?" And Black Canary goes, "It's Mirror Master." And then they said, "Yeah, you got to get used to the Flash's rogues gallery." I thought that that was a perfect line, because as someone who loves the Flash and knows that his rogues gallery is so entertaining and goofy when it comes to the names. I mean, you had everything from the turtle to the Pied Piper to the Golden Glider. You have some of the silliest names in Flash's rogues gallery. So I love the fact that to a certain degree, DC made fun of itself, and I appreciated that.
And I think DC does that well. I just think a lot of times it's overlooked because there's, you know, a lot going on. But there are rare instances like this one, for example, where it's just kind of in your face. And when you can enjoy stuff like that, I think that's why, like, the Teen Titans one had stuck out with me so much, because you do get a lot of those funny one-liner quips, you know, that really stick with you and stand out. So yeah,
Oh,
the
are you
second part,
kidding
that
me?
was definitely the thing for me as well.
Sometimes when I'm literally like dark, when I'm literally zoning out into space, now that I've seen Teen Titans, every now and again that one line pops into my head: "Come robining with us." It is so delightful. I love that line. It is so funny. But I also really appreciated the fact that, once again, unfortunately, this is a little bit of a shortfall for the second film, because you have to have known a little bit more about the world of RWBY, because I know who Arthur Watts is. I remember that character very well. And the fact that in the second film, they reference Salem a lot. So Salem is the main baddie in the world of RWBY, and that's why I keep saying the show should have ended 4 seasons ago, because they still haven't even fought her yet. So it's a little bit
Oh
weird
well.
to me. So yeah, the two sides still haven't clashed. I honestly haven't even watched season 9, because the weirdest, oh god, here's where I'm gonna officially get you to want to go watch RWBY. In season 9, they end up in a Wonderland-esque dimension. So There you
Ooh,
go.
I like it. You know what
Yeah.
though? A lot of anime does end up in a wonderland of sorts. I see so much homage to Lewis Carroll and the world of Alice and all of these things more often than I'd like to admit. I'd like to think it's kind of how the Tenniel drawings bring that out, maybe in animators, but yeah, I can definitely appreciate that, even though I do think it's done a lot. But I think where that comes into play, because I do feel that way, where the second half was a little bit more Ruby heavy and the first half was a little bit more Justice League heavy. I think where we can appreciate that though is it gave something for both sides. If someone like me coming in doesn't know much about Ruby, which I didn't, and I still don't, I can still enjoy the storyline because it was followable. I might not know the details, I might not know how we got there, I might not understand the villain or the character per se, but I can still follow along and enjoy the film, you know? So even if you come in as a Ruby fan and know nothing about the Justice League, you still can walk away saying, hey, this was a pretty good movie, you know?
I mean, like I said, I think another one of the shortfalls of the second film is I don't think they got the voice cast right. I did not like Superman's voice. I mean, I actually, when I first heard Superman open his mouth, I said, wait a minute, did they get Clancy Brown to voice him? And then I found out that no, it's not it. But I think that Superman's voice was a little too deep. I don't know. It
You
didn't
think?
fit the
I
character for me.
Well, okay, I'll give that to you, but I don't think it was horrible. I don't think it really took me out of the character, you know,
No,
because I was
no.
more focused on the way they looked than the way they sounded, and I was really happy with how they turned out on that type of animation, and I
Yeah.
thought it was really well done. So in a case where like the animation is really good and the voices are kind of meh, or opposite where the voices are meh and the or the animation is meh and the voices are good, I think you can balance that. But when you have just crap on both sides, you know, you're just not getting it anywhere. You're not getting a good color palette. You're not getting a good storyline. Then I'm a lot more nitpicky about things like voices. But it didn't really take me away from the character. I didn't see anything wrong with it. If anything, I thought there was so much humor that I was really just trying to follow along with the dialogue than so much focus on the voices, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the highlights of the second film were definitely the relationship between Weiss and Bruce, because they definitely took what happened in the first movie and they really added to it. And I loved how the interesting thing is the person who is not from said world is the one that seems to help out the character that is from that exact world. Bruce does a lot to help Weiss in the first movie, and he's the one with the powers. And then in the second film, she has no powers, and yet she uses her brain to help him from dying from being poisoned and really like taking a little bit more control of her situation. So they worked really well as a pair in both of those films. I also really appreciated what happened with the Flash in the second film because of everything that he had gone through in the first film, because he felt that he was violated. So he's on edge in this second film, and he's really working 10 times harder than everybody else, even sacrificing sleep to try and break this case. So I did appreciate some of the things that they did with the characters based on what happened in the previous installment.
Yeah, I felt like the Flash was running on guilt. I think he felt very guilty from the first film. Like a lot of what had happened was somehow his fault. And so he was really trying to put all his power and energy into solving the case and to try and figure out the why behind it all. So, yeah, again, character development was on point, and I think we had very well fleshed out characters across the board.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to rate the two films, I mean, I'm pretty much going to just rate it as a whole package because it's one story. It's 3 star out of 4 for me. Like I said, it's not perfect, but the only thing that I hope that it specifically did for you, my friend, is that it gave you incentive to explore the world of Remnant and try and get a little bit more invested in the world of RWBY, because I personally think that you don't need to be an anime fan. I mean, it's not technically anime. It's got a lot of anime tones to it, especially when it comes to the looks of the characters and the style of dialogue, because it's got a lot of Teen Titans like comedy, and especially when it comes to the story and all that. Yes, there's a lot of anime elements, but it is an American made CGI television show. That's what it is. And again, I haven't watched the latest season, but I personally feel that it is really good. It's got a pretty decent following too. So I'm hoping that it will give you on your own time to try and just check out the show. You don't. I personally feel you don't need to go any deeper than the television show. And the television show is not like 60-minute episodes. There are some 15-minute episodes, some 30-minute episodes. Like, I think the show gets a little bit longer as the seasons progress, but in the very beginning, it's a very easy watch. Like, you can get through the first 15, you can get through the first 5 seasons of RWBY in like less than a month.
That's typical for anime though, because I mean, I have watched anime from the beginning in a couple of different areas, and they usually start like that, very fast paced. And I think that's kind of a ploy to get people to watch because it's palatable. You're not investing too much time. You're not trying to oversaturate yourself with learning character names and character development and world building and all of these things. So I think that's very important in the world of anime. RWBY definitely has my heart. I just genuinely fell in love with her character. I fell in love with her friends. Her friends are fun too. There's a lot of heart to the development of those characters.
Very much.
And like I said, the fantasy element of this that really made me feel like I was inside a video game was so much fun. So yeah, I would definitely check out RWBY, and I'm right there with you. I give it 3 out of 4. And that's only because I'm not well versed in RWBY, and so a lot of the character storylines or connections to RWBY fell short for me. So I can't fully say I loved everything about it because I left with a lot more questions than answers. But that's good because then it does take me into that curiosity factor of, okay, now I got to follow the world of Remnant. What's that all about? So let me dive into that rabbit hole.
Well, I just hope that you don't mind me saying this because there actually were RWBY Funko Pops, and yes, I do own all 4 of them. So.
Steve, do you not know me by now? Don't you think I've already sought them out, and maybe I've already ordered them?
Oh no! Oh, I will tell you though, if you actually did, when you see them up close, they're gorgeous. They're some of the most beautiful. The RWBY Funko Pop is beautiful. It really is.
So I was happy they did.
Well, I'm a little upset that they didn't go any further than the original, than the 4 of Team RWBY, because there are other characters that, like I said, if you start watching the show, you are going to love Nora. She's the best character. I love Nora.
Well, I definitely look forward to.
So it's like, because like I'm saying, like
you learning more.
Because you see how cheerful and how upbeat RWBY is, right? Nora is that, but like on 25 cups of coffee.
She's gonna be fun then.
Oh yeah, you're gonna love her. Just remember this one thing, and when you watch the show, you'll understand. She is queen of the castle. Anyone watching out there knows that RWBY reference. I applaud you. So let's get into the DC Universe Tomorrowverse films, because, like I said, I don't think that they have necessarily gone as far of a dive as the MCU has been doing in recent films and TV shows and stuff like that. But I've got to be honest with you, Cammie, I have not truly been on board this Tomorrowverse train. Ever since the New 52 storyline ended with Justice League Dark Apocalypse War and started anew with Superman, Man of Tomorrow, some of these films have definitely been better than others, but as a whole, I really do not seem to care for them, because outside of maybe Batman, The Long Halloween, I can't even remember what Green Lantern Beware My Power is about. I'm sorry. I can't.
I mean, I walk into these films with a grain of salt because obviously you have a lot more knowledge about where these characters come from and their previous storylines and so forth. So when I go in, I don't necessarily judge anything on the history because I don't have enough history. So I think that allows me to kind of just go in on a clean slate and say, okay, give me the story, tell me what this is about, and then if there is any kind of reading correspondence, any series, or anything like that that I can then immerse myself in. If I enjoyed the film, then I'll take that avenue. But honestly, this package of films that we're discussing today, I don't think there was anything that I truly hated. That was just
Well,
really hard to get through.
well, Legion of Superheroes, that's a good movie. I enjoyed Legion of Superheroes very much. And I was personally surprised because every single time a Tomorrowverse storyline film finishes, I'm always left with this question. And even with Batman The Long Halloween, where are they going with this? So I appreciated Legion of Superheroes because this is a group of characters that I do know a lot about to a certain degree, but don't know enough about. Like, I will still
Mm-hmm.
say that I love what they did with the Legion of Superheroes in that episode of Superman the Animated Series, The New Kids in Town. I loved that we were introduced to Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl, and Chameleon Boy. And as someone who also
Mm-hmm.
watches Young Justice, I appreciated what they did with the Legion of Superheroes there, but I did want more. But in this film, I love that it's a Supergirl based story. And it was really cool to see some of the characters that I really did not know too much about, like Timberwolf and Chemical Blad and Shadowlass, and some of these other ones who I've seen images of but don't really know too much about. So I appreciated the fact that when Kara is sent over to the 31st century to train with the Legion of Superheroes, as is something that she has done in the comics by her cousin, it was very interesting to see that when she got there, the main Legion of Superheroes team is not there, and there's just some reserves out there, and she goes and meets the ones in training.
Yeah, so love the beginning because anytime that we are able to get a Kryptonian story and kind of go
Yes,
back to that world and just see what it was, because anytime we're given a flashback, it's so quick and we typically get the same storyline. Baby Superman gets put in a vessel and sent to Earth, and then there we go. So we know his parents, but it's nice to see other characters, it's nice to see other developments, and we got a nice rich introduction because we were able to see Kara's mom, and we were able to kind of get that dynamic between them. The dialogue was really beautiful, and her send off, I think, was just very poetic. So that was a great beginning. And then to see her
absolutely.
kind of just catapulted to where Clark was at, and how she was a little awkward. It was a fun beginning. So I was like, okay, where are we
Oh,
going with
yeah,
this story? So, yeah, she
absolutely.
was awkward, and I think that also made her believable. Again, I like when a character is slightly flawed because it kind of brings that character down to earth a little bit, and it makes you want to know more about them. So just the way she was introduced to her cousin and his world and how she fit in, but didn't, that gave the perfect segue to send her off to where she ended up. And it was a really good start to this story. And then we get all this cast of characters that we haven't seen in other films. So it was interesting, and
Yeah.
I'll lead with that because there's character developments and relationship developments that I'm still going,
Oh,
huh.
yeah. Oh, yeah, because of course, you can't have Kara joining the Legion of Superheroes without introducing Brainiac 5. That's happened so many times. Yes, there is a relationship between those two in the comics and in other show, and even in the episode that the Legion of Superheroes showed up in Justice League Unlimited, he's the reason why Kara stays in the 31st century. So I thought that it was also very interesting that this whole movie became a Brainiac story. And I wanted to put a little bit of emphasis on that because when you, myself, and Andy were chatting about Lex Luthor, you actually brought Brainiac into the conversation. So I was very curious to see your thoughts about this film and how the main antagonist of the film was, in fact, Brainiac.
Well, and again, a lot of these films that you and I watched together are storyline introductions that are new to me. And so the whole dynamic of the relationship between Kara and Brainiac 5 was unsettling at first because I didn't know that it was coming. But I knew that it gave me segue to get to our main villain, and that was Brainiac. Because I'm like, there's no way Brainiac 5 exists on this forum with all of this rich history, and we're not going to see the OG Brainiac. And the way he was introduced and brought into the storyline was epic. I loved the dynamic of him having other versions from other time periods of Brainiac kind of nestled into his body and made this vessel and gave him the power to kind of be. And the destruction of Brainiac in front of our own eyes, and how Brainiac 5 was kind of the mastermind behind that. He gave him the power, or them all the power, to kind of say, so who's really in charge here? I thought was super cool. But anytime Brainiac is on the screen, my eyes are there. I loved getting to know Brainiac 5. He's still not my OG original Brainiac. I will always give the crown to Brainiac because he's just very methodical. He's very I don't know, there's just something about his aura when he enters the scene. He just completely encapsulates it. He becomes the story. All your focus is on him. Brainiac 5 doesn't give me those same vibes. I just think his character is still developing, but he's still an interesting character, and he obviously comes from a very rich storyline, of villainous characters. But I don't think he fully possesses that villain character, or the characteristic rather, that I'm looking for.
Okay, and then of course there is the twist where hero becomes villain, and I don't know, you probably didn't, but I saw it from a mile away because when Mon-El introduces himself to Kara, he says the one key word where I say to myself, yep, he's evil. He mentions Daxamite because in the lineage of the world, in the history of Krypton, Daxam and Krypton are not the friendliest pair. They don't care much for each other. So I knew that Mon-El was going to be the one that's causing all the trouble. So that's, I think, probably one of the only shortfalls that I had for this movie. I sort of knew that Brainiac was going to show up. It just made so much sense that he would. And I knew that Mon-El would be part of his little scheme. So that's what I was saying. Like, it was very predictable to me. That's the only reason that I would probably not call this movie like the one of the very, like, for me, that's what pretty much like knocked a whole star off for me, because it was just so predictable. It really was.
See, and I didn't get that. I mean, I knew Mon-El was either going to go one of two ways. He was going to be the evil villain, or because, I mean, he just came across too fake in the beginning, just with his love of Krypton and just all the history he came with. I mean, he was just like a chatterbox in Kara's face, just how much he loved everything about her planet. So I'm like, this guy's a little over the top, so he's someone to watch. But then there was also the flip side for me, thinking that maybe he's just going to be a dork. Maybe he's just going to be this character that has this nerd obsession with Krypton. He's got all this knowledge. He's going to come across as this, handsome, debonair hero, and he's not going to have anything to offer this crew. So we're just going to see him as this character that is ballooned at the beginning and then deflates in the end. But the spin on him being the actual villain, I can't say it was like a huge shocker for me, but I was like, oh, okay, so he's the bad guy. But it made sense. I think in a way, though, for me, he was a really good villain until my Brainiac hit the stage. And then I was like, okay, now we're talking. However, I will say that this particular film did not give me the same vibes that Brainiac normally brings to the table for me, because of the fact that he was coupled with those other versions of, other variations of Brainiac. There was just a lot of give and take in that moment. So you weren't getting the full on genius that I feel that Brainiac is. You know, he didn't get the limelight. He was kind of, in a way, battling with himself, battling with his family lineage and their heritage and their legacy and all of this, while we're trying to kind of give Brainiac 5 the keys to the future, you know? So there was a lot happening in that moment. And so for me, it just wasn't my quintessential Brainiac. But a lot of this story was just shortcoming anyways for me. It didn't
Yeah.
capture me the way a typical DC film does. I didn't hate it. Like I said, there was none of these films that we watched that I hated, but this definitely wasn't a favorite for me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just say that there was no way that Mon-El was going to be the dork, and the fact that you mentioned ballooning and deflating, because the resident dork, that position is filled by Bouncing Boy, and everybody knows that. But
Oh my
well,
gosh,
Bouncing Boy is a great character. I love Bouncing Boy.
he makes me laugh every time he's on the screen. I'm like, oh my
Bouncing Boy
god,
is
he's gonna be
awesome.
a ball again.
Bouncing Boy is awesome. But the whole thing with the circle, it's just like, once again, you get to that post-credit scene where Superman and Supergirl are talking to each other, and then Batman said, "You didn't tell her," and then all of a sudden, Batman and Superman just vanish. So I'm like, once again,
Yeah,
I'm looking at myself and saying,
where are we going?
okay, where are we going? And I'm just going to say, we then go into Justice League Warworld. And let me just say this, I was extremely excited for this movie because Warworld, Warworld is a thing. Warworld means Mongol. Warworld means arenas and battles and something crazy. And oh boy, did I get something completely different. And Cammy, I hated it. I really hated Justice League Warworld.
Okay, so I'm not gonna say I hated it. It's again not one of my favorites. Which, by the way, we didn't rate the Legion of Superheroes. I'm falling at like a 2.5 out of 4.
That's right. I
I
agree
mean,
with
I
you.
don't know
I would
what.
give it about 2.5 as well.
So moving in then to Warworld now. Okay, so I don't hate it, but I also didn't love this film. My thing is, it's not so much the you're calling it boring. I'm calling it a slow crawl.
It
I love
is.
westerns, and I love when western meets horror. That is probably one of the genres you don't hear me talk about often. I think that western and horror pairs very well together. So the way this movie started off was very promising for me. I was like,
Well,
oh, where are we
I
going
mean,
with
hold
this?
on, hold
What are
on.
we entering?
Well, let me just stop you right there. You're absolutely right. Western and horror slash Western and sci-fi, it works. I mean, for crying out loud, people read Stephen King's The Gunslinger series. You can't get more Western meets horror meets sci-fi than that.
There's some incredible western horror, and you're absolutely right, sci-fi pairs right in there with it. I mean, it's very rare when you will have a western horror that doesn't have cosmic elements to it. There's always going to be some kind of paranormal cosmic element to it. That said, the characters in the beginning fell very flat for me. Like, they were trying to be these Billy badasses that weren't that badass. You had Wonder Woman completely taking over the scene, and I'm like, okay, so what is she gonna do? Carry this entire movie, you know? And her storyline wasn't even that powerful. It was just kind of like this half-hearted version of what we've seen from Diana before. So that said, when we take what felt like a part two, if you will, even though it was the same film, then it got better. When we went black and white, when we really went sci-fi, that's when the movie became more promising. If you can get through the first 20 minutes of the film, the rest of the film was really well done. But that first half, I just feel like they didn't fully flesh the dialogue. They didn't fully flesh the characters, and there was so much more we could have done in that western setting, and we didn't. I think there was lost opportunity there.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you 100%, Cammy. I really do. I mean, basically in this movie, like I said, when I hear the word Warworld, I anticipate Mongols sitting in a gigantic throne overlooking an arena and creatures of all sorts fighting to the death. I don't anticipate Mongol also to be this very tall, skinny creature, and all he's doing is putting various creatures from different worlds into dream sequences. Now, don't get me wrong. If there's one thing that I can give this film credit for, it's for some of the characters that we get. I mean, did I ever anticipate seeing characters like Batlash or Jonah Hex or Travis Morgan, aka Warlord, and Demos in this film? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, these are characters that have been in some of Bruce Timm's animated shows, particularly Justice League, actually. I mean, Jonah Hex was also in a very early episode of Batman the Animated Series. So, yeah, it's cool to see these very far-fetched DC characters. I applaud the fact that they found a way to use them. But no, I didn't care much for Wonder Woman's story. I didn't care much for Batman's story, but you're absolutely right. When we go sci-fi noir with Superman's story, that's when it starts to get a little interesting, and that's where the movie starts to sort of redeem itself. But then when the plot is officially revealed and here's the real curveball that I was not thrilled about. Like, why the hell did they bring Lobo back into this? Because I hated him in the Superman Man of Tomorrow film. I mean, don't get me wrong, Lobo's a fun character, but I think he's written very poorly in the Tomorrowverse world. And the whole thing with Martian Manhunter too, like, I see what they were trying to go with this, but it just didn't hit the mark.
Comedically, for me, it did hit the mark. I really thought that Lobo and the Martian Manhunter really played well off of each other, and I think that where Lobo falls short in dialogue or in what maybe character development for you, I really think that John Johns is what comes in and kind of makes up for that. You know, when he's acting like a bonehead and just that kind of Viking rogue that he is, and he is talking about, well, who's the one that let you out? Well, hey, dumbass, who's the one that put it in your head? So it's moments like that that really just kind of invigorated for me, and I think that because I've grown to really love the character Lobo, and I don't know where my love for the Martian Manhunter came in. I even bought the Funko Pop on that one. I didn't buy any of that other part of the series, but I bought the Martian Manhunter because I'm like, I have to have a piece of him. But I do think that overall, all of the characters that we were introduced to, regardless of storyline, were not fully fleshed in this film. I think that there was a lot of elements that were missing, but when we got to the point where the Martian kind of introduces himself and kind of expresses the why that he's there, I think Lobo made a little bit more sense for me. And I didn't hate the dialogue. If anything, it kind of set us up for where we're headed next in this journey. And I really do hope both of them are a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there were some small redeeming qualities, which is why I would give this movie maybe 1 star. But I know that's really, really harsh.
Ouch.
Yeah, I just did not. You want to know what makes a bad what really leaves a sour taste in my mouth when it comes to me watching a DC animated movie is when it actually puts me to sleep. That movie puts me to sleep, and it's sad.
Okay,
But
well, and again, that's fair. That is fair. It was very slow. It was very slow paced. You really had to kind of push yourself along as the moviegoer to say, okay, I really want to know what we're leading up to. Where is this going? So you had to kind of force yourself to the end. But I think there were some noteworthy elements. I wouldn't go as low as 1. I was going to put it at about 2. But I could see going 1.5 in some regard, because I mean, as harshly as I am being critical of the character development in this, maybe that wasn't fair to give it a full two, rating, because where did the story really take us other than to, the potential next
Well,
infinite crisis world that we're
well,
about to
yeah.
partake?
Let's talk about that. So basically, we take a look at everything that we have seen so far in the Tomorrowverse storyline, only for Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman to be snatched up by Harbinger, basically saying, prepare for the coming
Harbinger.
crisis.
Yeah.
So you literally gave me all of these subpar films that barely seem to have a connection between one another, only to let me know that we're actually going towards Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's all you did for the last couple of years just to get me here. So that's what's coming up next. So, number one, I swear to God, I believe that someone from Warner Brothers was watching me, because I basically said that if they're going to ever make a Crisis on Infinite Earths movie, it cannot be just one movie. So, knowing that we're going to be getting next year 3 DC animated films plus one, which is completely off the topic, but we're going to be getting the entirety of the Crisis of Infinite Earth storyline. They apparently wanted to really do this because of the fact that we did lose one of the co-creators of Crisis on Infinite Earths. We lost George Perez, which was a really, really sad thing. So they have already made an announcement that Crisis on Infinite Earths parts 1 through 3, they're not going to suck. So I sure as hell hope that they're telling me the truth here, because this is one of the greatest, if not possibly the greatest DC comic story ever told. This is the one that changed the game. This is the one that rebooted the DC Comics universe in 1985 for the better, not for the worse. So I don't know what they're going to do. I'm excited, but they also said that this is also going to be the conclusion of the Tomorrowverse.
Which I'm sure you're happy about, since you've hated it so much.
Well, way to put me on the spot there. No, it's really like, again, you've built up to this point, but you built it up so poorly. That's the thing, because it's like all of those movies. I mean, I know you have soft spots for some of these movies. I know that you and I very much disagreed on Justice Society World War II. But it's just like when you take a look at those movies, and again, they're so forgettable. I don't remember half the stuff that happened in these movies. I mean, I think the only thing that I remember is the characters that are in these movies. Legion of Superheroes is the only one that really sticks with me next to Batman and The Long Halloween, because I enjoyed those movies. I think those movies are well done. But and I really do appreciate what they did. But still, leading up to where we're going, they just didn't do it well this time. Maybe it's just because of the fact that Bruce Timm really doesn't have a big hand in this, and that Sam Register is the man in charge right now. I don't know. But we're getting Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths, Part 1, early 2024. It's coming out on the 23rd of January. So at least it's coming out pretty quickly. I'm excited about that. But again, I just hope that they don't screw this up, because there have been a couple of great DC stories that they have screwed up.
I don't think they will. And I have a lot of faith in this next leg. And the reason I say that is because I think that all of these films being subpar, I mean, they weren't spectacular films, but I did have fun with each of them in their own way. I think that we maybe are leading up to greatness. And I think that possibly in the back of their mind was the intent all along, is let's, just kind of pull them along, and then we're going to give them this epic story. So there's probably a lot of pressure on these creators to make it what we're hoping that it is, because when you have such a fan base from the actual storyline that people have read for decades and have been sharing with other generations, it's a really hard plate to fill. And so there's a lot of pressure on you as an animator, as a writer, as a, storyboard director, to ensure that you're giving the fans what they're expecting. And so I'm excited to see what DC is about to develop. I think there is a lot of hype on this. And I think sometimes with hype, though, it can also go two ways, because sometimes things are so incredibly hyped up that they suck and they're not what we're hoping that they are. But in this case, like I said, we had such a dull introduction to this. Maybe this is going to be epic and incredible. So we just have to kind of wait and see.
Well, I'm glad that you said that. And this is going to basically be my final thought before we wrap up another episode here. I hope everybody enjoyed watching it. It's so funny because I was watching a YouTube video earlier today, and the person was basically saying it would be such a shame because what I believe, he was talking about a specific movie. He said, I believe that what happened was they wrote a very specific scene in this movie. It was the one that they believed was the most perfect scene. And then they just built a whole movie around it and they failed. I think that that's what happened here. They knew that Crisis on Infinite Earth was the end game. They had point B. And not only did they have to figure out a way to go from point A to point B, I think they might have worked backwards. So I really think they had point B, and then they said, okay, now let's go and go back in time and take the journey to point A from point B. And quite frankly, there are some story writers that can do that very well. George Lucas is one of them. Okay, he may not be a good dialogue writer, but the way that he managed to get us from episode 4, 5, and 6 to episodes 1, 2, and 3, he executed it very well in terms of a complete storytelling. Not necessarily dialogue, but storytelling, it's great. It's one of the most brilliant stories that was ever written. So it's a rare feat to write like that. You got to be really good at your game to write a story in that capacity. And that's where I'm going to leave it there.
Well, and I'll piggyback off on that last thought, and I'll end it on, it also says a lot about our animators and those who are asked to be part of the presentation, because we have to keep in mind that as readers, we're going to do a takeaway from a story far differently than the next fellow reader to our right or our left. You and I converse continuously about different series and characters, and we both come in with different perspectives. And I think that says a lot too for not only character development and storyline development, but where they want to see. When you've got an opportunity as a creator to be asked to be part of a project, you get really excited because you're like, okay, this is my time to shine. This is my opportunity to bring to life characters that I want to see take this to the next level. And so where you might have a character that makes sense to one animator or one creator, it doesn't necessarily resonate with the other creator. And so you kind of have a hodgepodge mess of a film. And I think maybe that's what we've seen here. We've seen a lot of really brilliant creators bring to life what their vision was, and it just didn't work well together. So maybe as we lead into this bigger melting pot of what we're all anticipating and what we're all hyping up and super excited about, maybe all of those different ideas and concepts and vision will give us that final product that just wows our socks off, and we're like, yes, this is what we wanted from the beginning. And then we can let all the other stuff just kind of be, a water off the duck, or whatever, however they say that phrase, and it won't matter because, like you said, some of those things are so forgettable that you won't even think about it because your end result will be so epic. That's all you'll be talking about.
Well, that's going to wrap up another DC Animated Live show. Cammie, this was a great episode. So much amazing stuff to talk about. And I'm looking forward to next year because I'm excited for those 3 films just because of the source material. And Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's actually coming up on its 40th anniversary in 2025, which is pretty crazy. So it's a story that we're actually going to be looking at in other areas. We're going to read the books because it's part of a big project that we're going to be working on over here on That's Comical. So the Crisis on Infinite Earths, we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll do a Who Wore It Best when all 3 films come out. That would be kind of fun. We'll see. But in the meantime, everybody, I appreciate the fact that you all came to watch. Please, if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to leave a like and leave us a comment. We'd love to talk to you. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you'll be up to date on all of our latest content. I know that we lacked it a little bit this year, guys, and please trust me when I say more is coming. If you all could just be flies on the wall with some of the conversations that Cammie and I are having about ideas that we want to bring to this channel, you'd be just as excited about it as we are. So for the time being, I will say farewell and say that we all over here on That's Comical hope that you have a fun, festive, and more importantly, a very safe holiday season and a happy new year. And until then, everybody, we will see you in the next one.